This is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
Well, welcome to the second hour of the show from our Middle East programming headquarters. I am Becky Anderson. We're in Abu Dhabi where the time is just after 7 in the evening, and we are following several fast-moving stories for you. Moments from now, we're going to take you to the US Capitol, where US Attorney General Pam Bondi could face questions from lawmakers on the Epstein files. And next hour, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with US President Donald Trump at the White House. And I'm going to get you the very latest on Mexican cartel drones breaching US airspace in a move that triggered a temporary ground stop of the airport in El Paso in Texas. Well, any moment now, US Attorney General Pam Bondi will testify in Congress and will likely get grilled by Democratic lawmakers over the Epstein files and the actions of ICE agents in Minnesota. Questions about the Epstein files will come amid new revelations, of course, from unredacted documents and criticism that some of those documents still contain redactions that should have been lifted. Well, Bondi's appearance in the House is happening a day after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick faced questions in the Senate over his visit to Epstein's Island years after he had claimed to have cut ties with the convicted sex offender. Well, I'm joined this hour by CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson and CNN politics senior reporter Stephen Collinson. And Stephen, let me start with you. Your latest analysis online is titled "Lutnick's Grilling Shows Trump a Glimpse of a Grim Possible Future." Just explain.
Yeah, well, we've had a number of hearings over the last couple of days, which members of the administration seem to fear from Democrats. And that now, because Democrats hold the majority in either house of Congress, but if they win the midterm elections, you can expect an absolute wall of scrutiny and oversight the likes of which this second term for Trump has never seen. So that could be so I think this is boiling up. Whether it really hurts the Trump administration politically, that's another question.
Joey, let me bring you in. It is now Pam Bondi's turn in the hot seat after lawmakers went to the Justice Department to see these unredacted Epstein files and accused the organisation of a possible cover-up. Have a listen to how Congressman Jamie Raskin put it.
I saw the names of lots of people who were redacted for mysterious or baffling or inscrutable reasons. I think that the Department of Justice has been in a cover-up mode for many months and has been trying to sweep the entire thing under the rug. There's no way you run a $1 billion international child sex trafficking ring with just two people committing crimes, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. No way. It doesn't work like that.
I just want to be absolutely clear, in the first instance, let's remember the victims in all of this, because what we are seeing here is a whole load of sort of emerging themes, not least reputational damage and all the rest of it. But I wonder, give us the legal perspective on whether there should be more charges, Joey, against more co-conspirators, and whether the allegations of a cover-up has merit.
Yeah, that's the open question. I mean, the whole basis for this Epstein Transparency Act is really to look in and to dig into the issues concerning accountability. Who was involved? What was the nature of their involvement? What was the time frame upon which they were involved? What did they know? And when did they know it? So those are issues in terms of who else could or should be accountable that are going to be answered. Let's remember some history about this, right? The history is that they had Epstein. Who's they? They is the federal government in addition to the state government in Florida. They had him in 2005. And there was a sweetheart deal that was negotiated when the government was subject to abuse. They entered into a non-prosecution agreement. What does that mean? It means that he wouldn't be prosecuted, nor were four of his employees who were specifically named, Becky, in this prosecution agreement. They were not to be prosecuted either, in addition to other co-conspirators. What a sweetheart deal. Who gets that? Billionaires, maybe? Yes. People who are connected like Epstein? Yes. And so he ends up pleading guilty to 2 felonies, state felonies. The federal government has this indictment prepared that has multiple counts. It goes on a massive abuse in the years then. And so I think inquiring minds want to know, and that was the basis for the Epstein Transparency Act, which was an act passed to say release the files. Let the American people look at the files, evaluate the files, and who else was involved. Last point, and that's this. It was noted back then, right, back in 2005, 6, and 7, of course, victims were not even notified of this secret deal, that there were 29 people, 4 of which were co-conspirators back at that time who were not indicted. The other 25 who negotiated these deals with the government so that they were executed. So, yeah, people are really concerned, and so there are going to be questions. And why, if you're releasing files, you not release them all, you don't release them timely, you're redacting information. The law specifically says you cannot redact information relative to foreign dignitaries, politicians, or public figures based upon reputational damage. Shouldn't happen. And so why do you have these redactions? You know, they're saying, well, it's beyond me. And so I think there's a question, and those questions are very real, as to give us this information, stop redacting things, and let us know what happened so that we can get to the heart of your question, which is who else, if anyone, should be prosecuted for this Epstein abuse of underage girls, of who enabled him, who provided for this to happen. Those are very good questions.
And Joey, as you speak, we're looking at images, and I want to bring them up for our viewers, of Jim Jordan, of course, who is a close associate of Donald Trump. He's the chairman of this committee, and he's just setting things up before we gavel in for the introduction of the Attorney General. Stephen, as we wait to hear from Pam Bondi, you wrote in your analysis, quote, "Every time a high-profile figure, let alone a senior cabinet member, faces such scrutiny, it is bad news for Trump, who is also not accused of wrongdoing, but has struggled to explain his own past friendship with Epstein. Now, Stephen, a new document does seem to contradict Donald Trump's repeated claim that he had no idea about Epstein's proclivities." Of a better word. Trump in the mid-2000s apparently telling police he was glad they were stopping Epstein because, quote, "everyone has known he's been doing this." Trump has survived the Epstein controversy so far. Is there a point where the tide could turn?
Information that was completely damaging that hasn't come out about Trump, and we haven't seen any of that so far. I think it's quite unlikely that this is an existential political issue for the president, as it seems to be, for example, for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who never even met Epstein. Ironically, I think that's for reasons of the differences between the US political system and institutions. The president is elected for 4 years, and it's very hard to get rid of him. There's no prospect of that on this issue or any other issue right now, given Trump's control over the Republican Party. I think where it's damaging, and the president sort of let the cat out of the bag himself last week. He said in the Oval Office, it's really time for the country to move on to something else. Trump doesn't want to be speaking about this. He wants to be talking about what he sees as the success in the economy, his foreign policy. He's moving up to a midterm election that's already looking very difficult for Republicans. This is an issue that he can't make go away. It probably hurts him in the abstract, even if it doesn't destroy him. but it keeps coming back. And I think that is the problem on this. And then, of course, it adds into this wider perception that Trump's Justice Department is corrupt. And I think that is something that could be politically damaging come the midterm elections.
Joey, I want to squeeze in another question to you before we hear from Pam Bondi with her opening statement. If you were questioning Bondi today, very specifically about the Epstein files, and let's remember this is a DOJ oversight hearing, so we may find that this is not dominated necessarily by the Epstein files. But what specifically would you ask her about that specifically?
Not enough time in the show to review all the questions that are going to be out there about these files. You are the Attorney General. You have an obligation to run the law department. You are the chief law enforcement officer in the country. Congress issued a law that was signed, which is the Transparency Journal, that you are to be transparent. All the information to the American people. The deadline was December 19th of 2025. You didn't meet that deadline. What was the basis for that? What were you holding back? Why are you having this drip, drip, drip of information? With regard to redactions, do you understand the law? The redaction speaks to no foreign dignitaries redacted. Have you been redacting them? It speaks to no politicians being redacted. Have you been doing that? It speaks to public figures. Why are these over redactions? And by the way, in terms of over redactions, there are under redactions, right? What about people who are victims? Why was their names released? What about this other information? Do we have all the information? What else are you concealing? Was anything altered? What exactly, and when could we expect everything to be released so that the American people can see what, if any, involvement the President of the United States had with this? And so there's a lot that she's going to be asked concerning that, Becky.
It's good stuff. Thank you, Stephen. Jim Jordan is concentrating in his opening statement on immigration. The sense is that is where Pam Bondi will want to keep the focus. And it is another key issue on the agenda. The acting ICE director striking a very defiant tone when he testified yesterday. What do we expect from Bondi on that file?
I'm sure that there'll be great defiance. The president has said that he wants to take a softer touch on immigration. Massive questions still over the killing of 2 American citizens by federal agents last month. On the spot. Every time that she comes to a hearing, she comes armed with opposition research and defiance, and she's trying to create moments for conservative media. I would expect her to push back very strongly against those questions, and you're going to see Republicans like Jim Jordan and other Trump allies on the committee try to give her some cover, try to shield her from those attacks, and redirect the questioning towards what the Republican Party still believes is its great success in securing the border, even if Donald Trump's policies, the policies of ICE and the Justice Department, have turned immigration, which was once a political boon for the president, into a liability.
Right, I'm going to just leave it for the time being. Both of you, thank you very much indeed for helping us set up what will be an important testimony and cross-examination, testimony from the AG Bondi and cross-examination of the Attorney General in the hours to come. I am going to just squeeze in a little other news before we get back to that. So for the time being, stand by. In the next hour, US President Donald Trump is welcoming the Israeli Prime Minister to the White House. The two leaders planning to talk primarily about Iran. It is understood President Trump has said a second round of US negotiations with Iran could happen as soon as next week, and Benjamin Netanyahu looking to protect the interests of Israel, of course. He says he plans to convey what Israelis believe should be essential principles in the talks, including expanding the topics beyond Iran's nuclear program. President Trump keeping intense pressure on Iran from multiple angles. calls, telling Axios he might deploy a second naval strike group to the region and warning that Iran would be, quote, foolish not to make a deal. For more on this and the broader picture, I want to bring in Israeli journalist Amir Tibon. He's the author of The Gates of Gaza, joining us now from Haifa. Amir, thank you for your time today. Netanyahu's posture towards Iran has been quite clear. He reportedly shared it with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner before last week's talks in Oman, the indirect talks between the US and Tehran, and again last night in Washington. So the question is, how much sway does he have over President Trump? Your sense at this point?
I think he decided to go to Washington because these talks seem serious and he wants to try to influence it while he can. I mean, when these kinds of diplomatic events take momentum and they begin to have a life of their own, sometimes it already goes in some direction and it's too late at that point to try to change course. So perhaps he believes now is the time to try to influence it. And basically with President Trump, if you're not speaking directly to him, then you're not using your full potential influence. But I think Iran is definitely one of the key issues that will be discussed in the meeting today, but not the only one. We are also seeing some dramatic potential developments surrounding Gaza. President Trump wants to have a meeting of the Board of Peace for Gaza take place next week. And I suspect that at least from his own political interests at home, that issue for Netanyahu with Iran, his main issues are what he's put out in public. What should be the contents of the agreement? Should it cover only the nuclear file or also the Iranian ballistic missiles and other issues? When it comes to Gaza, I think Netanyahu faces a real problem because over there, President Trump is working with leaders of other important countries in the region, and there's a plan. It was unveiled by Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff. It includes massive investment in reconstructing the Gaza Strip from the damages of the war, with the involvement of the important Arab countries. Some of them are supposed to finance it, and at the same time, it's also supposed to include the beginning of this international expel 2 million Palestinians from Gaza, which was like a dream come true for the Israeli far right. And then a year later, today, we're in a totally different place. Nobody's talking about kicking people out of Gaza, but about rebuilding the place for the Palestinian residents. So while on Iran, this is really a national consensus issue in a way here in Israel, on Gaza, the politics are very thorny for Netanyahu.
And also looming over this meeting is Israel's move towards a new law that would make it easier for Israel to take over Palestinian-controlled land in the West Bank. That is Palestinian and Muslim countries as de facto annexation, including here where I am in the UAE, which is a key signatory to these Abraham Accords. The Trump administration, in response, has reiterated that it doesn't support support Israel annexing the West Bank. How much of a point of tension do you believe this is going to be in today's meeting?
I don't think it's going to be a point of tension directly between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm not sure how well briefed President Trump is about this issue, but it is definitely causing tensions between his top advisors and the Netanyahu government. Because for President Trump, I think his entire way of looking at the Israeli-Palestinian issue and the Middle East, in general, is through, let's say, the lens of potential wins and agreements. I'm not sure he gets into these details, but the people working for him who are supposed to produce these big agreements, big wins that he's dreaming of, right? An Israeli-Saudi peace agreement, expanding the Abraham Accords. The people working on that file, Kushner and Witkoff and others, they understand how problematic it is for the Israeli government to promote this kind of legislation and then go back to their Arab partners and say, hey, can you move toward normalization with Israel? The two things directly contradict one another. So whether the president himself has been briefed about it, I cannot say, but I'm sure this is going to cause problems down the line. And again, it's a place where the political interests of the prime minister contradict what the Trump administration is trying to do here in the region.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really good to have you. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. We are keeping one eye open on the Hill, because we are expecting to hear the Attorney General Pam Bondi with her opening statement as she will be cross-examined in what is this DOJ oversight hearing today. We're going to get back to that as soon as we hear from the Attorney General. U.S. airspace over El Paso, Texas is open again. Says it was closed earlier because of military operations. The Federal Aviation Authority now says there is a threat to commercial aviation. Let's bring CNN's correspondent Pete Muntean. Pete, you're live in Washington. Just fill us in on what's been going on here and what you understand to be the situation.
A real ping-pong story from that the Federal Aviation Administration essentially instituted a sweeping blanket ban on all flights going in and out of El Paso, Texas, 10-mile radius up to 18,000 feet starting overnight without much of an explanation. Now that restriction has been lifted and we have some insight into the initial mystery shrouded this incident and all of these Federal Aviation Administration, we're told by multiple sources who have been briefed by government officials, was concerned about nearby military operations at Fort Bliss, specifically a place called Biggs Army Airfield, where the military was conducting anti-drone operations, also using a high-powered laser, we are told, to institute essentially a counter-drone system that could have potentially blinded pilots. That has been a concern of lasers and use, and so it seemed like the military was going to use this system without clearing it with the FAA, and the Federal Aviation Administration put in place this blanket ban. We're talking a city of about 1 million people, about 100 flights each day. It was a 10-day ban initially until February 20th. We're told by multiple sources that that is when the federal government was to have a meeting with the Pentagon, the military, and the Federal Aviation Administration. The FAA says it acted because of concern, we're told by sources, for civilian flights. Now that has been lifted, really here as to why this went into place. It seems like a left hand of government talking to another hand of government. We're pushing on that and trying to figure out exactly what place and what conspired here, but we now have a little bit more insight into this very mysterious airspace shutdown that's since been lifted.
Really important we get this from you. That is the very latest, and as Pete said, still pressing for more